Hey, kia ora, Helen Brahms here, coming to you live from Sun City in Arizona. Hope you're all having a super fantastic, sparkling Tuesday. It has been an awesome day here. Don't know what have you guys been up to today? Let us know in the comments below. That would be awesome. Um, and today we're going to be talking about the importance of genealogy. But first, we have a public service announcement. If you are in business and you like to network, please come and join us as my guest at Networking Riches Live online August 10th and 11th, which is a week from tomorrow and Thursday. And you just go to havetonetwork.com and fill out the registration form there, and you get to come free as my guest. And networking, you never know who you are going to meet networking. Trust me on this. If you saw our show a couple of days ago, you met Casey. We were at 3 different events over 4 days. We met at 3 different events that were held over 4 days. All of them were each a completely different. The first event was a LinkedIn class, an advanced LinkedIn class. The second event was a networking event. The third event was a different networking event. What do you think I learned about networking? I knew a lot in theory, but Casey gave me the opportunity to practice what I had learned in theory. And this is what he brings Networking Riches. He takes it to another level when it comes to networking. And it's just incredible. He talks about how to prepare before you get to a networking event, what to do when you're at the event, who to talk to, who are the key people in the networking event, at any networking event that you talk to, even down to your 30-second or 60-second commercial. For those that have those commercials, we talk about those as well. And then what do you do after the event? And it doesn't matter if it's an event you go to once a year, once a week, once a month. All of these ideas can apply to all of them. So come along and join us as my guest and go to havetonetwork.com. Yes, I know I don't have a before the dirt nap link for it yet. Before the dirt nap, yeah. I don't have that one set up yet. I have it, I just don't have it set up yet. So we're going to havetonetwork.com, and you get to fill out the form, and you'll get to come free as my guest. Okay, so tonight's topic is the importance of genealogy. How important is genealogy to you and your family? Do you know where you came from? Do you know who your ancestors are? Do you know the struggles that they went through to be able to, the struggles some of your ancestors went through to blaze that trail for you? When you think about genealogy and ancestors and stuff, you've got people who have gone before you that have left a trail for you to follow. Now, many years ago, it used to be, when it came around to surnames and things like that, if your father was a baker, you were known as the son of the baker. And that's and over the years, it developed into the last name becoming Baker. The same with blacksmith. You've got that name there too. A lot of surnames originated from occupations that one of your ancestors had eons ago, years ago. And you were known as, or you might have been known as the son of William. And later on, the last name became William. They just dropped the son off because it just seemed like too much. And then you had your first name and you had William, and that was your name. So there's different things. There's different ways that names have come about. So do you know where your names came from? So this is one thing that we can research in genealogy, is tracing back in time to see. And a lot of time people would follow their father's occupation for generations. And that's where I got into a snag with my third great-grandfather, because my third great-grandfather was a bookbinder. But on his marriage certificate, it was listed that his father was a foreign agent. I was like, a foreign agent? Ooh, spy. I'm a big James Bond fan. I'm a huge James Bond fan. So anything to do with spy, and I love the Jack Noble series, the Jack Reacher series, the Grey Man series. I love all of those books that are to do with spies and military, and yeah, I'm a nutter when it comes to that stuff. I just love it. But so of course my brain goes straight to foreign agent. My fourth great-grandfather was a spy? Well, how the hell did my third great-grandfather become a bookbinder? But then I found out the foreign agent meant that he was actually a jeweler, and his father was a jeweler. We found the marriage certificate for my fourth great-grandfather and my fourth great-grandmother, And on there it had listed that he had listed his father's name, and his father was a jeweler. And my fourth great grandfather was one of those ones that would, from what we can make out so far, we haven't confirmed this. So this is the current working theory, is that he would travel a lot to foreign countries by ship, buy jewels in the East, and bring them back. Or he may have gone down to Africa and got jewels from there and brought them back to England, because that's where they were living at the time. So that's the working theory right now. We're just trying to find more information so we can prove that that's what he actually did. But somewhere between the 1851 census and November of 1851 census and 1855, something happened to my fourth great grandfather. We don't know. And because he had a very common name, we are having to pull up all of the people between that period that died during that period and research them to see if we can find the one that fits in the tree. Because what happened in November of 1855 is my third great grandfather was baptized on his sixth birthday, because he was born in 1849. So in 1855, on his sixth birthday, he was baptized. And it had listed in the baptismal record his mother's name, and it had her maiden name there, so we knew we had the right person. And her address had been the same address she had been in the 1851. Actually, no, it was the same street that she had been on in 1851. I'll explain that one in a moment. And then underneath that, it had father was from and the place name the father was from. And I thought, well, that's rather curious. Was. And I'm like, what's with the was? Was implies past. Maybe he had died, and he was from an area where they weren't known to have lived. So I was like, well, actually, no, that's where they started off. And I was like, this was, maybe he died. And then, as a good genealogist always does, we always look above and below any entry. You always look above and below the entries, as well as, excuse me, as well as, and please don't die, my internet has been very finicky lately. Okay, we're still working. Sorry, technical issues. And so you always look above and below any record to see, who's above, who's below. Was there a family that got married at the same time, baptized, whatever? And there was an entry there for another Elizabeth Morris who lived at the same address as the one that was listed for my third great grandfather. And I was sort of like, okay, but there's a different father listed for this kid, and this kid was only like a couple of years old, and we're like, and getting baptized. But the street addresses were the same. Her name was the same. What happened? And so we're slowly unraveling that after 1851, when it said that she was married to a jeweler, he was not in the household at the time. It said she was still married. So that's why we think he may have been off overseas or something. Something happened. And I was like, well, where did this guy come from? It's the same street that she lived on. So we went back to the 1851 census and started nosing around the other entries on the page that she was on. And her next door neighbor was this bookbinder who lived next door to her. That is the one that she ended up married to and having another child and had a child with. And that became my third great grandfather's stepfather, was the bookbinder next door. And that's how my third great grandfather became a bookbinder. So sometime between, from when he was 2 through to, I'm trying to remember I found their marriage certificate for the next door neighbor. I think it was like 2 years later. So sometime between 1851 and 1853-ish, she ended up getting married to the bookbinder next door from the 1851 census. So it is amazing what you can find when you go looking and seeing where things come from. I'm like, bookbinder. I thought that was one of my favorite jobs when I worked in the school libraries. Because at school in New Zealand, you could be, in my middle school and my high school, I was a school librarian, and students could work in the libraries during their lunch breaks, and things, checking out books, helping cover the books, helping categorize the books, making up the little, this is going to go back, making up the catalog cards that we used to have that went into those little catalog card drawers, and putting the little stickers on the back and everything else so you could find them. I got to learn the Dewey Decimal System very well back then. So by the time I got into the Royal New Zealand Air Force as a publication specialist, I knew the Dewey Decimal System inside out. And one of my jobs in the Air Force was working in the Recreation Library, which is like your public library. And again, I got to cover all the books and categorize the book, catalog the books, and make those little index cards up and everything else. There was a certain format for it and everything. So that was one thing that I got to do. And I'm like, where did this passion for books come from? I've always loved reading. I've always loved books, and I especially loved putting doing the clear plastic covers to go on the jackets of the hardback books. So when you get a hardback book and there's that paper jacket on it, we used to cover those with plastic and then put them into the book. And there was a way that we would tape the covers onto the book so you wouldn't lose the dust jacket off the book. So that was one of the jobs I used to have, and I used to love doing that. And I'm like, and so it makes you curious, where does this sort of stuff come from? It's got to come from somewhere down the train. It's like, why did I go into the Air Force? My dad was a first responder. My mother was a nurse. My paternal grandparents both served in World War II. Their brothers also served in World War II as well. My paternal grandfather's grandfather, so my great-grandfather, he was a captain in World War I and II, and he was the captain of Fort Balance, which was the fort that overlooked the harbour entry into Wellington. And then he had siblings who were in World War I as well. So there is a long history of service in my family. So that's where my love for the military has come from, is from that. I've always been fascinated with the stories. I've always loved talking to the people. I love going to air shows. If you've got air shows there that have military, the Warbirds military airplanes like Spitfires and Mustangs and Corsairs and Phantoms and Zeros and Messerschmitts, I'm there. I love those shows. And this is where my love for the military has gone. If I go back in my genealogy, I can see where things have come from. And yes, there are traits that are passed down through your DNA. It's actually really fascinating when you get into it and start looking at things. But why is genealogy important? It helps you establish who you are and where you've come from. It gives you a look into your history. I'm able to connect with certain points in history because I had family that was involved with those points, like, this military, the thing about the military, having grandparents and great-grandparents that fought, that served during the wars and everything else. I have a passion for those. We went, when I was in New Zealand for Christmas in 2018, we went to to Te Papa, which is the National Museum there in Wellington, and they had this most incredible display about Gallipoli. And Gallipoli, for those that don't know, took place on the 25th of April in, now I've got to remember my years, 1915. Hang on, it's either 14 or 15. Ooh. But it was the 25th of April when the Australian New Zealand Army Corps, known as Anzacs, invaded Gallipoli. And it was one of the bloodiest battles ever. They didn't win. They actually snuck out of there. But this whole display and the way they had done it was just impactful, and you got to feel it. You got to experience it. It was a very emotional walk through. And even though I had no ancestors or relatives that I know of that were at Gallipoli, I still felt the impact of the people that had been there, the lives that had been lost, the conditions that they had to live in. And it was just, I still remember it to this day, walking in there. And the hardest one, the one that really choked me up was they had these huge statues, these lifelike statues that were massive. They were probably about 2 to 3. I think they said they were like 3 times the size of a human being, but they were, and they had them down to, you could see the hairs on the soldiers' arms. You could see if you look at your skin closer and you see the cells sitting there, you could see those patterns on these people's hands and their arms. You could see the emotions on their faces. And the one that got me the most was the nurse. You come in and you can hear voices, and it's the nurse telling her story. And she was on one of the Red Cross ships that went from New Zealand across to Gallipoli to help, as it was a hospital ship. And she'd been writing these letters to her brother who was based in Gallipoli. And it took several months to get there, but once they got there, she's asking all the soldiers that come on board if they had seen her brother. Had they seen her brother? Had they seen their brother? And when we go in, she's sitting on this crate, and you come in and you see the back of her. And as you walk around, you can see tears on her face, and she's holding this stack of letters in her hands, and it had what was it written on? I'm just trying to remember what was written on there. Something about killed in action was written, and the letters were bundled together, and it had killed in action on there. And she had received these letters that she had sent to her brother once the ship got there, after she'd been asking. Somebody finally realized that she was on the ship and brought her these letters to say, here, return to sender, killed in action. And she's sitting there with these letters that she had written to her brother, and tears coming down her face and stuff. And hearing the voice of the nurse telling the story was heart-wrenching. It was heart-wrenching. She was looking forward to seeing her brother again. And meanwhile, her parents back in New Zealand had already been notified that he'd been killed in action, and they had no way to tell her because she's on a ship in the middle of the ocean somewhere on her way to Gallipoli. So it was just a very impactful thing. And I'm like thinking of all of these people that have passed and about their families back home and stuff. And so when I'm researching the military, I love researching military records. I have to tell you, there's some really cool stories in the military records. But one of the names that were mentioned on the board there, I recognized, and they actually had this display about this particular person. And I looked at the name, and I turned to my dad and I go, I know where he's buried. And my dad looked at me and goes, what do you mean you know where he's buried? I says, you know where he's buried too. And he looks at me rather strange, and I said, you remember when we were living in Waitara, and on the marae there, and there's that great big tall column with the guy standing on top? He goes, yeah. I said, that's him. I said, he's buried underneath that column with the statue on top. He's like, really? I says, yeah. I said, that's where he's from. That was his tribe. That's where he came from. And I hadn't even read any of the description or anything else. I just read the name, and I knew who Sir Peter Buck was, because that was part of the history that we had learned in high school. And we had done several trips to the marae, and had several sleepovers there and that sort of thing during my teenage years, with different activities and things over there, and all the hungies. Oh, such good food. Still taste it on my mouth. And we got to hear a lot about Sir Peter Buck. And my dad's like, really? I says, yeah. I said, next time you happen to be driving up around that area, I says, go check it out. He's like, okay. But then it had this whole story about him and how he came from Taranaki, and it was all written there, all the stuff that I had known from high school. So it's leaving these legacies behind, leaving these stories behind, so that those of us that come behind get to hear these stories and get a sense of who we are and where we've come from. Now, I know some people out there are sort of like, I really don't care where I came from. I don't care for the family. I understand. But there are people out there who are wanting to know, who am I? And this is when genealogy research comes in and is so important. Some people want to claim that they're of some nationality and all of that. And so they go into their tree to find out. And you hear about these, the commercials on TV or whatnot for Ancestry and the DNA, thinking that you're one ethnicity, and the DNA results come back with a different ethnicity. So now you've got to change everything. But it's forging those connections between the present and the past. But not only that, it's being able to relate to certain points in time in history when you have a personal connection with a family member who, maybe a distant member, maybe a third great-grandfather, a second great-grandfather, whatever it is, that you now have a connection with that point in history because you had relatives involved in that time in history. And I don't know about you guys, but when I find out that there was a certain event that took place and I had relatives that were there or ancestors that were there, I want to find out more about that event. And that way it becomes more personal to me, and I now because I have a personal connection. They teach history in school, and some schools are actually doing away with history, which I think is the biggest mistake ever, but that's for another day. And they just sit there and they're reading and they're learning about history, but it sticks better when they suddenly realize, oh my gosh, I have an ancestor that was there. Now they start remembering these historical events a little more because they had an ancestor. It could have been, their ancestor could have been somebody like, historical. Think of some of the historical figures they could have had a connection, either a direct connection to that ancestor, to that historical figure, or it could have been it might have been a cousin in their family, or it could have been, a great grandfather. And now that person becomes alive for them as they learn about their role in history. And you can stand there and go, that was my third great grandfather, or that was my fifth great grandmother. And you start thinking about things like this, and it can give you a sense of pride with things that are in there too. Researching family trees, if you get the family involved, it becomes a great bonding experience as well. I loved going hunting with my mother. When my mother took over the genealogy, I was always interested in what, when she said, I'm going to be going to these records today and I had to go to work or whatever, and I'd come home and go, oh, what did you find out today? And so she'd tell me about all the stuff that she found out. And there's times that her and I would go together and I would help with the research. And that, I already had a love for genealogy at that point, but that just kind of cemented it and kept it moving forward to today, where I just have a huge passion for it. I love it. Some of my favorite stories were taking photo albums and saying, tell me the story about this. Who's this person? And listening to the stories about the people in these photo albums that I had never met, would never meet. The only way I could meet them was through the stories. Again, stories are important. If you have photographs laying around, who is in the photo? As long as you put, there's several things when you're doing photographs. Have who, where, when it was taken, what the occasion was. Who, when, where, and what the occasion was. At least have those basics on the photograph or with the photograph. So when people coming in the past can go, oh, that was great, Aunt Nellie, and oh, this was taken in, and you've got the date of the photograph on the back. You've got the, this was my grandparents' 50th wedding anniversary, and there's great Aunt Nellie, and let me tell you a story about Aunt Nellie. And then you go into the stories. And genealogy will also help you find the truth behind some of those stories as well. Like you go, well, we've heard a rumor in my family that we're related to this particular person, or we've heard a rumor in my family that this particular event took place. And so then we turn it into a research question, and we go looking. We go to prove or disprove our hypotheses. This is our question. Here's our theory about it. Now let's go prove it or disprove it. So it gets to be a lot of fun. And you can either do the genealogy searching yourself or hire a genealogist to do it for you. But it is fun. And also another thing that you can find out through genealogy is when you're looking at death certificates. What did your ancestor, your direct line, what did they pass from? Because on the death certificate it'll have cause of death. What was their cause of death? And it's interesting reading some of these. And then you can also branch out into their siblings to see, is it a trait? Is there a record of heart disease through the family? Is there a record of cancer through the family? Is there a record of some other disease through the family that we have, diabetes or whatever, that we may need to keep an eye on? And so you get copies of the death certificate. What was their cause of death? And so it can help you find patterns through there, so that you know that, okay, we've got a record of heart disease over here, so we need to start doing something, taking extra care of our heart, making sure we get it checked out. So it can help you in that aspect as well. When it talks about when you're filling out on those medical forms, and they want your family history, and they want to go back as far as your grandparents. It's like, I don't know, but you get their death certificate. There's their cause of death written on there, and you can write that in. I remember with Brad, we had to put in there, was anybody in his family had cancer. And we had found through the death certificates that, yeah. So we had to put that in there, and who got it, how old were they when they passed, what else do we have? You sort of got to go into their history, just sort of like the relation to you. Did they, what type of cancer did they have? How old were they when they passed away? How old were they when it was discovered? That sort of thing, so we could see if there was a trend. So it makes it interesting. You can also use genealogy to help find lost family members. For those that have been adopted, it is you've got specialists. There are genealogists who specialize in helping adopted children find their families if their families want to be contacted, or if the birth family is trying to find people that put up for adoption. These specialists will help with the tracing. It is a very specialized field. There is a lot of stuff they have to go through, a lot of legalities and all that sort of thing. So this is a way, but they can help you do that. So those are just a few. Let's see. I'm just checking my list here. So those are just a few things about why it's important to trace your ancestry. because sometimes you can find out where certain things come from. And I love watching shows like Who Do You Think You Are, where they take the celebrities on a journey to discover their ancestry. And some of the stories that come out of there are just incredible. They're just some incredible stories. I remember Chris O'Donnell was wanting to check on his family. Why was there such a sense of family? He had a very strong connection to family. Why? And when it came through, there was father and grandfather and great-grandfather and great-great-grandfather and all of this back through generations where they had left a military posting or whatever it was that they were in, to go home because the family needed them, and being able to help out. He even had one third great-grandfather, I think it was. No, been longer than that. He had one of his great-grandfathers who was actually at Fort McHenry in Baltimore when the British attacked in 1812. And I remember the episode. They're standing there at Fort McHenry with the flagpole and all that, and the park rangers were telling him about how the command had come down that that flag was not to fall. And he said there were literally bodies piled up against that flagpole to hold it. Men died holding that flagpole up to keep it upright. And Francis K. Scott was on a British ship out in the harbour, and that's where the whole Star Spangled Banner song came from, when he looked out the window and that flag was still flying the next morning. And there was a pile of dead bodies. I don't know if they were all dead, but there was a pile of bodies there at the base of the flagpole holding that flagpole up. They were not going to give up the fort at all. They were not going to let the British come in. So it's, you find out interesting stories like that. You find out about, the Salem witch trials. That was kind of interesting because I didn't really know a lot about the Salem witch trials. I was just like, okay. And I heard about it. And I remember when Brad and I were at Williamsburg one time in Virginia, and they do these reenactments in the evenings and things. And so we'd gone down and we'd gone to this one for this trial. And this was a trial for a woman who was, that was a trial to prove that she was a witch. And so we're sitting there, and we actually happened to get there we figured out from a previous night, from a previous court case we had heard, which was completely, I tell you, there was a complete night and day difference between these two trials. The second one we went to, the witch trial, was very somber, very serious. The other one was full of all these little one-liners. It was a lot of hilarity, a lot of laughter. It was a really good night. But we figured out that wherever you get in line, they just bring you in, and if you're first in line, you get to go and sit up. There's like the judge's seat, and then he's got it's a horseshoe-shaped bench, and you get to sit on that horseshoe if you're in the first 12. And then the next lot get to sit over here on these benches, which is for the jury, and then everybody else gets filed in to different areas and things. And so it was interesting. We got to sit up there, and I'm like sitting next to the judge. That's how far up we were like the first in line. And so I got to sit next to the judge, and then there was and then Brad was next to me, and his son Josh was next to him, because we had Josh with us. And it was a really cool event, but it was very serious, and very very serious, because she was being tried as a witch. And what was interesting about this story is that the trial said their conclusion was that she was a witch. A few months later, in the Washington Post, so this event took place like 300 years before, like over 300 years beforehand. And then a few months later, we're reading in the Washington Post, and the Virginia governor had pardoned this woman that we had seen this trial about, had pardoned her from being a witch, and found out that she was not guilty after all, and overturned the thing. And I thought, okay, that's like over 300 and something years late. But it was kind of interesting, because we had been at the trial and seen some of the things that had taken place, and some of the thinking of the time period, and then to see in the newspaper, just a few months later, that she'd actually been pardoned. And she was convicted, but she was able to live out her life. She wasn't like burned at the stake or anything like that. She did live to be 80 something years old before she passed away, and then over 300 years later she gets pardoned. So again, another interesting story. Who knows? That person could be in your family tree. Who is in your family tree of interest? Have you looked to see? Are you related to anybody famous? Are you related to any particular historical event in time? Are you pulled in a certain direction and you can't figure out why? Check out your family tree. Anyway, that's it from me for tonight. Have a super fantastic sparkling evening, and we will see you guys tomorrow. Oh, excuse me. We're going to be at like 7:30 tomorrow. It's going to be 7:30, and I'm sorry that the times are a little skewed up right now, but Wednesday and Thursday I sometimes have events on, and I happen to have an event on tomorrow that finishes at 7. So I'm saying 7:30 to give me time to decompress from the networking event, and to be ready for you guys with. I haven't figured out what we're going to talk about for tomorrow night. But anyway, have a super fantastic sparkling evening, and we'll see you guys back here at 7:30 p.m. Pacific time tomorrow. Hei konara.